Hi there, welcome everybody. Welcome to this transmission, live transmission. Welcome to everybody who's right now live or afterwards. We are right now here with Dr. David Benatar, who we are honored to have with. Dr. Benatar will have off his camera, but you will always see me in this interview and hear the translator. I will allow myself a couple of sentences in English to say hello to Dr. David Benatar.
So, Doctor, welcome to the society. This presentation is to welcome you for this induction to the society, the Ibero-American Society on Pessimism Studies. We are really honored to have you as a new member, honorary member of our society, because all your work is very important on pessimism studies, on many other studies, but I think that you are now one of the most important pessimists, say it like that, philosophers. So thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very grateful for the honor of the honorary membership, and I'm pleased to be with you and the other members of the society today.
Thank you very much. The other members are watching the transmission, or they will be. We have members in Spain, on Chile, Argentina, many countries here in Mexico, of course. So they will be watching this on different times, but thanks a lot, and you're really welcome.
So I will take a time to present Dr. Benatar, and at the end, I will take the time to present the award and the papers to thank Dr. Benatar.
Thank you.
Dr. David Benatar, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's professor at a bioethical professor in Cape Town University.
No, it's a philosophy professor and director of the Bioethical Center in Cape Town University.
He is author of many diverse articles. Within the books he has published:
Life, Death, and Meaning, Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence, published by Oxford University, The Second Sexism, Discrimination Against Men and Boys, Debating Procreation, The Human Predicament, A Candid Guide to Life's Biggest Questions. This year, he has published The Fall of the University of Cape Town.
He has occupied a visit spot at the universities
of Brandeis, Emory, Princeton, the National Institute of Health in USA.
This is just a brief part of what Dr. Benatar has done. He already has a Spanish interview. That's what we were speaking about before we were live. He has become a very, very known philosopher in Hispanic world. So we will be getting like a brief or small interview at this opportunity. I will ask in Spanish, there will be an English translator, and the Dr. Benatar will answer in English. The translator will not make a Spanish translation. It will be done afterwards. So Dr. Benatar can feel free to have a long conversation or answer. First question, Dr. Benatar. What do you consider to be the relationship between your thesis and the classical pessimistic theory, taking into account authors such as Schopenhauer, Mailander, Michel Esteta?
Well, I should say that the way philosophy is done in South Africa is much like in other parts of the English-speaking world, where we focus more on problems than on historical figures. And so I actually came to my arguments independently and then heard about similarities between them and people like Arthur Schopenhauer, and I've subsequently read some other of these pessimistic philosophers as well. Clearly, there are some similarities, some points of overlap, but also some differences. So if we look at Arthur Schopenhauer, for example, this is somebody who, like me, is an anti-natalist, somebody who believed it would have been better not to have been brought into existence. But let me say that pessimism is a very broad concept and a very broad category. It can apply to many different things. You can be pessimistic about big, important existential questions, but you could also be pessimistic about quite micro level questions as well. And so I don't expect that the views that I've espoused would have a lot in common with all forms of pessimism, but clearly they would have something in common with many forms of pessimism.
Dr. Benatar, next question. Do you consider Peter Wetzel's SIEP as an antecedent of your theory, maybe a kind of intellectual master or teacher?
Well, again, I heard about this author, Peter Wetzel-Zapfe, only after writing much of what I've written about antinatalism. And then I did read some of what he said, but it's very little of what he said that is being translated into English. So I have very little first-hand access to his thoughts. He certainly was an antinatalist. There is lots in common between his thinking and my thinking, but the style of philosophy seems very different from what I can tell. Again, there are obviously different traditions in different parts of the world. In analytic philosophy, or the philosophy of the Anglo-speaking world, we're very much interested in precise arguments, in analysis, and sometimes people reach the same conclusions via different methodologies. And my sense is that he had a different methodology from the one that I have, but we're arriving at similar conclusions. But as I say again, this is based on a very limited exposure to what he said, given that his major works have not been translated into English, and unfortunately, I don't speak Norwegian.
Thank you very much.
Third question. What similarities and differences do you find between pessimism and antinatalism? And is pessimism the basis of antinatalism?
Thank you. Interesting question. I think that antinatalism is a very particular view. It's the view that we ought not to bring new sentient beings into existence. Now, I think that one basis for that is a kind of pessimism. In other words, it's a recognition that the quality of even the best lives is not very good, and that the best way to prevent all the misery, all the suffering, all the death is by not bringing people into existence in the first place. So here we have a pessimistic view on the quality and nature of life, which can lead to an antinatalist conclusion. But I think that pessimism is a much broader approach. In other words, it's not going to just apply to questions of procreation. It will also apply to other questions. So let's imagine you already exist. You've either already reproduced or you don't plan to reproduce. And you are asking questions, let's say, about the meaning of life. Does life have meaning? Well, you may have a pessimistic answer to that question, and that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with procreation. I'm not saying it's unconnected, but it's not directly about procreation. So I would say pessimism is a broader approach, and then antinatalism is a particular view that one can arrive at from a pessimistic perspective.
So in this way, Doctor, pessimism has a metaphysical view, for example, or political or even economical view. But what you're saying is that antinatalism is just maybe a part of a social pessimistic view, right?
I would say that pessimism is an approach to something. It's an attitude, but it can be an attitude about many different things. So you could be, let's say, pessimistic about the prospects for peace in a particular part of the world, or you can be pessimistic about what the economy will be like in a given country. Now, that's not anything to do with antinatalism in particular, but it is a grim view that you have about some particularity, about some particular matter. And I'm saying that antinatalism is a very specific view. It's, yes, partly a social view, but it's not only a social view. It can be just viewed as, I suppose, a kind of a view about the quality of life, or a view about the meaning of life, and you may have pessimistic views about that.
Dr. Benatar, how could you summarize, give us some points of your main thesis or ideas?
Well, I've written on quite a few things. So anti-natalism is one component of it, but I have written more broadly on what I call the human predicament. And I argue for a collection of theses there. And the one is that there can be no cosmic meaning to life. There is no cosmic meaning to life, but that we can derive some kinds of terrestrial meaning, sort of more localized forms of meaning. Your life can have significance for the people around you, sometimes for broader communities. So that sort of limited kind of meaning is possible, but broader cosmic meaning, ultimate meaning, that is not possible. So that's one thesis I argue for. Another is that death is bad for the person who dies, contrary to the Epicurean view, and that therefore suicide is not a solution to the human predicament. It might be a solution to some components of the human predicament, but it's not a solution to the whole predicament. Because once we exist, we have an interest in continuing to exist, and death, including death by suicide, would thwart that interest. I'm not denying that sometimes suicide and death might be the lesser of two evils. In other words, I'm not denying that life can become so bad that you would be better off being dead. I just don't think that that's true for people routinely. It may be true in extreme circumstances, but not true routinely. I also argue that the option of immortality would be a good thing. Of course, we can't have that. It's going to be practically and biologically impossible. But that is another negative feature of the human predicament, that we have very limited time spans, lifespans, and that we will die all too soon. So those are among the theses that I argue for. And these, by the way, do all support the anti-natalist conclusion, because the best way to avoid the human predicament, in fact, the only way to avoid the human predicament, is by avoiding bringing somebody into existence in the first place.
How do you evaluate the current pandemic according to your philosophical postulates or ideas?
Well, first of all, the pandemic doesn't come as a surprise to me. I actually wrote something about 13 or 14 years ago saying that it was just a matter of time before we would have a pandemic. And that's because pandemics come around at a certain level of frequency. The last major one we had was over 100 years ago, but they do occur. And I think this is just another feature of the suffering of life. We see how much suffering and death this pandemic has caused, not just in terms of the disease, but in terms of the disruption of human life and the economic implications and the quality of life implications for many people. So it doesn't come as a surprise to me, and I'm sure it doesn't come as a surprise to the pessimists who are listening today. This is exactly the kind of thing that pessimists would expect. I also think that the origins of the pandemic arise from our maltreatment of animals. This is something that I've also written about in the past. There is a debate now, I know, about what the precise origins of this pandemic are. But in general, pandemics do arise from animals, and then they cross the species barrier into humans. And in very many cases, this has been the result of human maltreatment of animals. And so I think that one lesson we can learn from this is to try to treat animals better, because it will actually be to our advantage as well.
In this way, you have this kind of misanthropic argument, if I remember well. Which one do you consider it's the best solution for the Earth in this sense, the extinction of humanity?
Thank you. I do advance both philanthropic and misanthropic arguments for antinatalism. Most of the work I've done is on philanthropic arguments. mainly because I think those are the arguments which produce the most categorical anti-natalist conclusions. So let me just perhaps differentiate what I mean by these. Philanthropic arguments for antinatalism are arguments that are rooted in the well-being of the being that you would bring into existence. So if you're contemplating bringing a child into existence and you're worried about that child's well-being, you're worried that it will suffer and it will eventually die, then your concerns are philanthropic. Misanthropic arguments are where you're worried about what the impact of the child you create will have on other beings, other human beings, and also on the planet and on non-human animals. So some climate arguments, for example, are misanthropic, not all of them, but some climate change arguments say, well, if we produce another child, there'll be another carbon emitter, somebody else who's consuming the Earth's resources, somebody else who's going to contribute to the whole climate change problem, and therefore I should desist from having that child. That's a misanthropic climate argument. There are also philanthropic climate arguments because some people say, well, if I have a child now, then this child will suffer because the environment it will live in will be a much deteriorated and degraded environment, and therefore this child's quality of life will be lower. And so I don't think that the philanthropic arguments and the misanthropic arguments are mutually exclusive. I think that they can both hold at the same time. But to answer your question in summary, I would say the philanthropic arguments are the more categorical ones. Those are the ones that produce the stronger conclusion, the stronger antinatalist conclusion.
Okay, doctor, the last question. You are a very recognized figure. And if our audience can access to your theories and your information, is there something you would like to say to the Spanish-speaking audience, finally, about your ideas or antinatalism?
Thank you. I think your questions that you've asked already have given an opportunity for me to give a taste of my views to the Spanish-speaking audience. One of the things I'm always acutely aware of is the language barrier. I regret not being able to communicate more directly with people that speak other languages. I know that you speak English very well, and I'm sorry I don't speak Spanish much better. There are members of my family that do, but regrettably I don't. And I'm sorry I can't speak more directly to them all in Spanish. But I'm very grateful that some of my works are now being translated into Spanish and will now be accessible to Spanish-speaking audiences.
To remark that in the society, we're working to translate one of his most important works in Spanish, so we can take these theories, ideas, and valuable information to the Spanish-speaking audience. To finalize, I would like to give to you the certificate as an honorary member of the Society of the Ibero-American Society on Pessimism Studies, SIEP.
So
thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful indeed.
Thanks a lot, Doctor. Membership certificate. This certificate recognizes Dr. David Benatar as an honorary member of the Ibero-American Society on Pessimism Studies, SIEP, and it's signed by myself. I'm the current president of the society, so I will send you this by email. And now you are officially an honorary member, Doctor.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. I'm delighted to be part of your organization.
So we hope to get to more people with Dr. Benatar's ideas, so they can get to know him better. And we hope that in the future we can have a more formal conference with his ideas and theories.
So, Doctor, you are invited in the near future to give a conference here with us, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And although we are all pessimists, I'm optimistic that we will meet in due course.
Sure, and we will have a chance to have this conference. Maybe if you want to work on your books, you have open doors in the society. So feel free to wherever you need in our chances in the Hispanic world, you feel free to ask it. So
That's
welcome.
very kind. I appreciate that. Very kind indeed. Thank you to you and the other members of the society.
So thanks a lot, Doctor, and goodbye to all our viewers.
Thank you.